Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Well, Patrick, happy to have you join the Grid Mod Pod today. It was lovely being at our last power delivery meeting together. So for all of our listeners, why don't you jump in and kind of introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started on our episode.
Yeah, appreciate it. Dr. Cook, Liz, I know we had many conversations, and it was great to see you and the others. And my name is Patrick E. Smith, Sr. I'm Senior Vice President of Operations and Technical Services for Ameren Illinois. It's located in the Midwest, one of Ameren Corporation's subsidiaries, Ameren Missouri being the other. I've been in the business a long time, had a probably non-traditional journey for someone that sits in my role now. I started as a bargaining unit worker, as a meter reader, worked as a line worker and other successively progressive management roles. And about a year and a half ago, I filled the role of Senior VP in Illinois. So pleased to be here today.
Yeah, awesome. And so for all of our new listeners here at the Grid Mod Pod, it is an expansive set of topics that we like to discuss here. All things grid modernization, really bring utility experts to the table to talk about what's going on, what's happening, and how we're enabling this transformational change that we're in the midst of. And for this special episode, I wanted to take the opportunity to really highlight the work that's happening at AEIC itself, which is a member organization that has utility members come together, such as Patrick and his colleagues, to talk about all things power delivery, is what we're going to be talking about today. So Patrick, just from your experience and thought leadership, how do you see the power delivery structured, and how is it led, and what are you guys kind of doing from a high level?
Yeah, great group of folks. It's made up of energy executives in the energy distribution area, and typically range from, we have some managers, but mostly the director level, all the way through to the chief operating officer level. So that's pretty much how we're made. Right now, our active roster is approaching 50, participating always a little less, still looking to grow the numbers. But we have a committee chair, and that's me for 2023 and 24. And we have 3 vice chairs. And that might seem excessive, but we do that in order to have a robust succession plan and ensure that we have stability going forward, and also to maintain stability in our future host sites. That's one of the big things that we come together a couple times a year. We talk about the various topics, but there are multiple subcommittees that are formed out of the Power Delivery Committee that we're accountable for. And they meet throughout the year as well, working on areas that support excellence in the delivery of electric power from the generating station to the customer.
Yes. And so the power delivery is one that has, does have this robust network of subcommittees. And I know that well because my roots come from the Distributed Energy Resource subcommittee, where we talked about all things DER. So for the Power Delivery Committee, you stated what type of leadership shows up. Our membership group expands across 180 different utilities. But what criteria per se do you all have for your members to be able to partake in these in-person meetings and reoccurring networking events?
Yeah, appreciate that. And like I mentioned just a bit ago, the membership is basically energy executives. And the focus there is those who are engaged in all aspects of the energy delivery value chain. So, from the design, the physical delivery, again, from the generating station to the customer. And we typically have members who are directors and senior vice presidents, but we're always looking for new talent, new membership that's particularly of interest to us. And when you think about a lot of the emerging technologies, we're open now to understanding, how do we broaden our view, and what does the energy delivery value chain encompass now? What does it look like when you think about other things like AI and the emergence of distribution automation and how that continues to grow and other things. But at its core, membership is really the criteria is really someone who's an energy executive in a utility or a co-op and who has some area of responsibility or accountability for the energy delivery value chain.
Right. And those non-utility folk that are listening, one, thank you for listening and wanting to learn all about the industry that drives, the lifeline of society. There's various groups within the realm of, say, a senior VP of operations. You're really overseeing, the system planning team, the set of engineers to do the design for all things transmission, substation, distribution, the protections and controls thereof. You're also ultimately in charge of the execution of the projects that are required to maintain the grid, as well as ensure that the grid can handle all future interconnects, all the way into the operations center where you're actively leading and being the visionary leaders that you all are, kind of driving how the operators see the grid, perform their jobs, and then really all the way out into the field. So it's a very expansive role, and it's a very exciting opportunity that you all have to come together in I think, a unique industry where, because of the structure that we've designed since really the turn of the last century, was that our grids are within certain geographical footprints. So you have this accessibility to each other to share, best practices, develop guidelines that can then benefit not only the group that converses, but also share that outside amongst other members that, aren't always there to participate. So that's kind of what's happening. So for your perspective, I think you could maybe rehash because it's really fresh in our minds, but even like from your past experience, what are some topics that you found was really valuable and some key components of the discussions you had that you kind of were able to take from and really drive within your organizations?
Yeah, I think, this recent meeting we recently were hosted by Encore and Fort Worth, Texas. And so we're fresh off of talking about key topics and something that's probably on most utility professionals, especially in the electric industry, mind. Probably started in the West Coast, but now you're starting to see it in the middle of the country is the wildfire risk. So really a robust conversation on how to mitigate this emerging threat. I imagine it's always been there, but just the risk associated with it and the way that investors and others and our boards are really seeking to have or having a higher degree of interest of how we're managing that type of risk. So that was a really robust conversation. Safety is always top of mind, until we find a state where we can make it through the year with everyone coming to work and going home safely. That'll always be a focus. We talked just about the data analytics and some of the emerging technologies, how to let data drive the decisions and understand how you can do a bit more with less. And sometimes less means just less strain and stress on the human body. Might not necessarily mean less people, but repurposing people for different measures. But just coming to these meetings, you think about benefits. There's certainly a technical component to it. It's hard not to be engaged and grow as a professional, in your competency and understanding of the grid. We have leaders from all over the country, and they're engaged in, traditional, but the emerging technologies, some are further along than others. And these discussions among us and the leaders at the table, they often reveal concepts and learning and understanding. And in many cases, it's new to some of the folks. And so that's really good. So it's always rich and ripe in environment for learning and understanding. And you see where people have proven out some of the things you might have read about, and you can hear firsthand for leaders who are actually executing new technologies in energy distribution in other parts of the country. And then I'll close with this. If I stop there,
Yes.
that would be, that would really be great, just, as far as your investment and participation in the Power Delivery Committee. But, the one thing is the relationships among the peers that are for it. That's incredible. And just unique to be in a room with folks that are doing nearly the same thing that you are, and they had the same problems and the same opportunities. So
And I just have to take the opportunity, and maybe we'll get the utility that presented, so we won't share their lesson. But I thought it was really powerful to see something that I was actively working on in my previous role, where you're really looking at the system holistically. And once you develop that strategy of bringing all your disparate data sets into a strategy, a cloud strategy, where that data can talk to each other quickly and effectively, you can start developing the tools that are required for assessing your reliability metrics on a 24-hour basis based on the day's events. You can ultimately do expansive GIS mapping of those reliability metrics on top of your grid with the weather patterns on top of the load. And it really becomes this very powerful tool that drives really each one of the organizations that I spoke of earlier some new insight. And so for me, observing and watching that someone has gone before and showing that real value, you really can't put a price on it, because then you can take like, oh, I saw that happen. And now you have a relationship that's willing to share, and you have the idea that it's feasible. And then you take that really like language and engagement, outside the room and really drive it back in your office. So I think that's like, something that it's really hard to put words around, right? And just like you said, it's the relationships you're building and the engagement.
Yeah, I mean,
And then
just to
I guess
put a,
also from,
I mean, yeah, that was definitely a key learning opportunity in the room. And as I sat there and I thought about it, you think about, say like you think about a celebrity chef, Liz, if I was to give the celebrity chef 10 ingredients and give you the same 10 ingredients, then it's likely the celebrity chef, I mean, making some assumptions here, but it's likely the celebrity chef might make a better dish. And when I think about what we saw, those were all ingredients that we all have in our respective firms and organizations and companies. And really, it's about finding that recipe, that aggregation of that data to really come out with something that's new and different and more impactful. So and that's kind of the way I saw it as I sit there. It's not about these different components, because we all understand these components individually, but who's going to come up with the recipe to drive insights that we haven't had before? So I think you put it exactly right.
Yeah. I think something that comes up often on these episodes is, we're in this space where we see what has happened. So we know what the past was. We can kind of assess where we are today. And then the goal is really knowing where we're headed or where we ought to be. And so we understand the what, right? We
Right.
know the ingredients, but in regards to the how and the who,
Mm-hmm.
that's what type of fruitful conversations happen.
Absolutely.
So just from thinking like forecasting or projecting, what additional topics really came out of that meeting that you guys find that you're going to be kind of engaging in, through your network and your discussion? So any new listeners, new members that haven't had the opportunity, one, reach out, you can come to be a part of the discussion, but also, just kind of highlight, what are other topics that are up all at the tip of your minds and you're actively, assessing in your roles.
Yeah, one comes to mind though, just looking at so we're working on standing up a committee that just has a focus on the system, and then mitigation of some of the crisis scenarios, and how do you recover initially, and this was born out of some of the situations that you might have seen in Texas, where you had low risk based on events and natural events or convergence of certain situations, that all of a sudden your grid is at risk, and you even get to a point where, hey, what happens if you lose the grid and you get into a scenario, a black start scenario, really trying to bring a grid back from zero. And so we really thought about, that's not something that you're faced with often, but it's no longer can be called maybe a black swan event. We know it can happen. We've seen it happen. There's historical context to it now. So I think the responsible thing to do for leaders in these organizations is to prepare for it now and have some measure of rigor built into the organizations, not only from a technology side, but from a staffing side, a thought leadership side. How do you have I guess the right processes and procedures with the right people and the right framework to address some of these scenarios when they occur. And then how do you maintain that level of preparedness going forward, into the next decade, also being ready to incorporate new challenges. So I thought that committee just, I think we're still moving around with the name, but it's really focused on the system. And early on, it'll be about system recovery,
real-time operations,
real-time
the folk
operations.
that are like inside the room making these. Yeah. I think just a caveat, another specific, and you said it a couple times there, is, we're sharing in this committee about lessons learned. So not really the future what, it's really, this has occurred, this is what we've developed, this is what we're doing, and this is what we learned, even the failures, right? Or the missteps. And then you're learning from that. And I think there's also power in the realization that, it's really about operational excellence, which is never finished, right? You're always in a continuous and consistent execution of, doing the strategy set forth before you, or your, set metrics, but really always trying to do continuous improvements. And so that's like another, like, from a language perspective, I think is very different than some other conversations I've seen in the industry, where you guys are actually sharing, like, these events occurred and these are the things we learned from it, and this is what we've done. And, like, what are your best practices? What are your guidelines? And so I think there's a lot of power in that too. That next committee is going to be a good one.
No, I agree. I went on a quick trip. This is maybe a few years back to NASA in Houston, Johnson Space Center. And we were fortunate to go where the International Space Station is housed. One is in the sky, but there's one they keep in a giant swimming pool and they practice. But as we walked in, they had all the mission patches, big placards on the wall, and then there were 3 of them that were like 3 times bigger than all the other missions. We were curious, and we asked the NASA folks, "Hey, what's that about?" And they said, "Those are our failures." And they said one of the things that we, it's kind of counterintuitive, but we highlight our failures because we think that's our best opportunity to learn. And you touched on that. I remember a conversation here just recently in the committee. We were talking about the thing that the field reclosures, we call them the trip savers. They can withstand, small animals, limb on a wire, and they'll reclose and they'll save a trip from personnel from the utility company going out to refuse, so save time and money. But there was some distinction and some variation in how we all use the trip savers, and so there's probably a best way. So that was a conversation we started, but I think we'll probably continue that conversation and figure out how to align around our best practice. But it did highlight that we use the same thing a lot different. And there's probably opportunity for growth there. So.
That's a good point. Yeah, like there's all these pieces of technology or pieces of equipment, and every utility's grid is like its own fingerprint. So how you've designed it, the perspective, the experience, the weather, everything is different, but you're using the same technology. So like having that ability to share various purposes is something that is not easily obtainable in the literature and all of the other efforts that are happening around us. And I also, like, if there was like a bingo card, I would have to say, like, from my note taking, like when we think about all of the language or the words, and I think we as the leaders of the organizations need to be precise about, like, it matters, even though some of us get real buzzy, right? Like resiliency, grid modernization, right? Electrification, but there's so much meat to those terms. But what I definitely heard in that room, it was speaking all about what are you guys doing best practice around reliability, efficiency, safety was like top of mind for every discussion, customer satisfaction, talking about this new, it's not new, but the highlighting that everything you all are doing is for the customer, aka who we serve, the idea of risk management, the word innovation, like all of that has to be a part of the decision making that you guys kind of bring to your table every day as you're like deciding and executing on various projects. So all about operational excellence, and the who and the how is what I felt. I know I'm going to your time is incredibly valuable. So thank you so much for jumping on our podcast. But before I let you go, I think another area that came up was really thinking about the next generation, right? Workforce development, the training requirements, and just really all that comes in that space. So from your journey and where you've been in the utility, which it sounds like it's been diverse and unique. So coming from the field all the way through management is awesome. What could you share for that next generation, or maybe that engineer or student that is listening to the Grid Mod Pod right now of, what are some qualities that they can take with their journey?
Yeah, one of the things I think on the outside looking in, and when folks think about a utility company, it's probably a lot more narrow focus, in their perception than what's actually available to careers in the utility industry. There's a real breadth of opportunities beyond engineering, and then the folks you see in the field. So that's one of the things I think why you do see some of the longevity in the careers in the utility industry, because you can come aboard and you can move laterally and vertically, great distances from where you started. And when you think about coming in, maybe as an engineer, working in safety, working in supply chain, working from, as a chemist, or some of the chemical attributes of an organization, working in regulatory affairs, working in finance, working in an economic capacity. It's really a really well-rounded business in need of a lot of different skill sets. So I think it's likely a good place to start for a lot of folks. And where you start may not be where you finish. So I encourage folks to keep that in mind, because and then it probably doesn't register as one of the more exciting opportunities if you didn't know any better. But I've had a really exciting career, done some really fun and great things. And I think that can be said for many of the folks who work for energy companies and electric, gas utilities. I think that's it. So for those coming out looking for great careers, I think this is the place.
I love it. And I will second that. I mean, I came into the industry having no idea what the power grid really did for me. And and I can't believe that it wasn't something that was taught to me at a very much younger age. So, making the utility space, one, we need all minds. And two, it's a very exciting space to work in because it is the lifeline society. So I love it. Well, thank you very much, Patrick, for your leadership, not only at your utility within the industry, but also AEIC. It's incredibly valued, and I look forward to our continuous engagement.
Thank you. Pleasure having me on today, and we'll see you soon.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.